Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to another episode of the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Pooja Chilakuri. My guest today is Holly Menard. Holly has been a chemotherapy nurse as well as a massage therapist, and she currently serves as an end of life doula. I have had the pleasure and the joy of meeting Holly. I love her energy, the light that comes out of her soul, and I am excited to bring that light into my show today. Welcome to the show, Holly.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
I am excited to have you, and I am looking forward to a very, very fun conversation about a topic that can be otherwise very heavy and it can weigh on us. Before we begin, though, I do want to, just have you explain what an end of life doula is. Maybe we can start with even trying to understand what end of life means.
Ah, that's a great place to begin, isn't it? Because I feel like it's a context.
Yes.
That very last question is,
Mhm.
what is it? What is end of life? What does that mean? That's a great place to start. Thank you. Actually, this may seem, and again, you said, we bring in the lighthearted and we bring in the, what can really give us pause.
Mhm.
Like, ooh, I don't know how comfortable I am with that question. Okay, so let's just go ahead and ask it.
Yeah.
So, so it starts now. I mean, from the time that we were born, in actuality, we were born, right? We were made. I heard
Mhm.
someone use that expression. So
Mhm.
we come into our life, we're made, we're humans, right? And we're living a human life. And as we become more aware and grow in that what matters to me most and into our careers and how we end up spending our life being a parent, perhaps, going on to, who knows, doctorate, postdoctorate, just really showing up in the world, whatever way we do. We've already, from the point we started, we're on that journey
Mhm.
to the end of our life. And the thing is that we celebrate the beginning of life, right? It for the most part,
Mhm.
it is a joyous experience.
Mhm.
So we have birth doulas. We have birth doulas who are trained and certified to they come in and do, a fair amount of educating
Mhm.
and like so that the mom to be and those in the family, the significant other who's going to be with her, they're informed.
Mhm.
They have an understanding as much as possible of what to expect, and they're also pointed to resources,
Mhm.
right? They may actually do some birthing classes,
Mhm.
yeah,
True.
in preparation. And then birth doulas are invited to be there for the birth.
Mhm.
Sometimes not, strangely enough, but invited to the birth. And that can be a really trying time.
Mhm.
The whole labor process can be very trying, very anxiety provoking. Someone who thought they were going to have a natural delivery may end up having complications, and it ends up not turning out the way that they wanted it to, right? So the birth doula is there to support through that process.
Mhm.
And in birth, we know that there's also a transition.
Mhm.
There's an actual stage in birth that's called the transition phase, right? So I say all this because at the other end of the spectrum, called life, there's also a transition. And backing up from there, there's also a huge learning curve. So many people don't understand, they haven't had the conversations with their family. They necessarily, some have, they don't feel like they can talk about it. not everybody, but a fair number of people, they just hold it in. And it creates, it creates an anxiety and the worry, and there's nowhere for it to go.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then not everyone is real well informed. They live up to a point of life. They could be perfectly healthy. Pooja, how many people do you know? Perfectly healthy. Then they start having, let's say, abdominal pain, or they have a cough,
Mhm.
or, they cough up blood, or
Mhm.
some kind of a symptom comes up, or they're just so tired.
Mhm.
They're just having it's troubling for them to even understand it, because it's not how they usually operate. And they go into the doctor and they find out that indeed something is going on. And, that abdominal pain could be something like pancreatitis, which is an extremely painful.
Mhm.
That is the huge symptom for pancreatitis,
Mhm.
but not infrequently, it's a sign of pancreatic cancer.
Mhm.
And a person could be absolutely fine up until that time that it's like all of a sudden not fine. So I say all this because the sooner we start preparing, the
Mhm.
better.
Mhm.
So when we have like, well, it came to me as like a healthy respect for
Mhm.
the fact that just as soon as I was born, there will come a point in time when I'm going to, in however way it is, diagnosis or suddenly,
Mhm.
unexpectedly planned out, however it happens to be,
Mhm.
there's going to be an end of my life.
Mhm.
I'm going to die,
Mhm.
right? So the sooner we start becoming uh, conversant
Mhm.
about that.
Yes. Yeah. I hear you, Holly. That's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, right? Having this conversation. It's a tough one to have because I know even just the subject of death and dying can be feel like it's a taboo, right? Most times we don't want to talk about it. Most times you don't even want to think about it. But
Yeah.
it's a very important part of our journey for our spirit, right? For our souls. So there's no way around it. So it's better, I guess, to just have these conversations, prepare, and have someone like you, an end of life doula to help us with that journey. So that is also interesting that the word doula, right? It's like a birth, but it's just a different kind of birth. We're leaving one existence for another, right?
Yeah, we are. And the more informed we are, just like the mom about to have their child, the better informed this person is who's going through the experience.
Yeah.
The, the, the experience can take on forms that a lot of people aren't aware of.
Mhm.
There's a lot of choices that
Mhm.
we have there, and there are tough decisions to make.
And that actually brings me to my next question. So, what are some of the challenges that someone might face besides the emotional turmoil? Besides the grief and the shock, but are there any other challenges that they might be facing? Besides their disease, even if it was a diagnosis that brought them to that point. What are some of the things you've seen when you're working with people?
Well, when you say the shock of it, let me back up a little bit, because I did want to share a little bit about what brought me to this work.
Yes,
And
please.
I'll,
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, that was
and
one of my
then
questions.
I'll
Yeah.
move in and I'll ask,
Okay. Yes, of
you can
course.
ask me that question. So
Yeah.
here we cover it. That's all important.
Yeah.
So you did share that I was a nurse, and that one of the roles that I played during my nursing career is to be a chemo nurse, and I was in a clinical research unit.
Hmm.
And so now I'm sharing that because in that environment, there are what are called protocols.
Hmm.
So when a person comes in for this clinical research, right, means they failed other treatments. So they're there and they're like an experiment, when you really come right down to it. And that means that everything that is done, I mean, there's not really an end to it until there's an end. It's not like, okay, I'm done, or the family is like, I don't think it's just too painful to watch what's going on. And I remember the names of my patients. We're talking 40 years ago. Some of the people I still remember because it was really hard. It was really hard when it came to the point where it's like, oh, please, just allow this 18-year-old beautiful woman to take her last breaths with her family, have them, be able to get in bed with her, have conversations, talk about the times that were good, all of that. No, it wasn't that way. There were all kinds of things that were done. Eventually, this one person that I'm thinking about that was so young, I couldn't even recognize her. It was really tough. And so that informed me in that way. I never have forgotten that.
Mhm.
And then I became, let's see, what's the order of things? Okay, let's say my parents, and three of my siblings. And then my son died unexpectedly about 9 years ago, in fact. And I have to say that I wish that I had known a lot about what a doula actually does, you could say, how doulas show up, because there was so much chaos with my families, and in particular,
Mhm.
and one in particular with my dad. There was so much friction, the whole dynamic
Mhm.
that was happening up to the point and including his actual, what we call active dying time. It was just, it was palpable in the air,
Mhm.
and that's not what anybody deserves to have that kind of experience.
Mhm.
And I knew that I didn't want that, what ended up happening. I wanted to somehow have it be a healing experience. I knew enough that I wanted that.
Mhm.
And this can be broadly applied. I think we all want to have the dying time be a healing time for the
Mhm.
person who's dying and for the family and friends. We want to know that the pain is under control. There's certain things that are medicalized, and and thank goodness we have that.
Mhm.
There's another whole component, though,
Mhm.
that is learning to be present for each
Mhm.
other. And
Mhm.
that's what I feel like I learned so much in becoming a doula. And when my son died unexpectedly, he was hit by a car, long story short. And it was so shocking to me that it actually took a little bit before I really got the momentum to move forward and make new decisions in my life. I mean, I did the best I could. I had wonderful, nourishing people in my life. I had a spiritual practice already. But when you're like tested and you already have a spiritual practice, well, you can kind of still go in a downward spiral. It doesn't keep you from that.
Mhm.
There's somehow within me anyway, there was the desire to go deeper into my spiritual practice.
Mhm.
So as a result of that, I found myself going to India with a friend. And that was a life-changing experience, to be sure. I mean, I know the audience, so I think I can mention this.
Yes.
It was a yoga summit, and the theme was cosmic consciousness. And we did a lot of breathing. We
Mhm.
did a lot of that breathing that is, not real well known to the Western world, but
Mhm.
it takes you out of yourself.
Mhm.
pranayama,
Yeah.
when you stick with it,
Mm-hmm.
even when you don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, oh my goodness, I can't hold my breath anymore. And I don't even know what they're talking about, these mudras and all that. I don't. But anyway, I participated the best I could, and I became aware of this interconnectedness
Mm-hmm.
with all of life and beyond
Mm-hmm.
that I had honestly not experienced before.
Yes, I have a, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just had to share this real quick. I have a friend, she's a yoga teacher, and she always says our breath connects us to the universe. So please continue.
Yeah, so I was in this it was a circular kind of sense of, I mean, it was like I was there, and I
Mm-hmm.
was a part of this movement that had no beginning and had no end. And it was a sense of, even though I didn't see people or animals or any of that, I sensed it in every way, that
Mm-hmm.
I was a part of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got back home, it was like, I'm not doing I'm not happy with what I was up to in my life. I'm not going to continue in this way. And no word of a lie, within a week or more since I got back, I think, well, we got through the holidays, so it was a little more than that. I saw a post on social media for someone, a certificate. She had just completed her certification for becoming an end-of-life doula. Had never heard of it, never heard of it. And so I went right to the site. I learned everything that I could. It was like, this is, this is, this is important right here.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention. And then within 2 weeks, I was already in that class. That was, it finished during the pandemic, right as we were going into the pandemic and all the rules and regulations around that. So it was a very fortuitous point in time, to say the least. Um, I felt so much like a yes. You know how sometimes you come upon this, yeah, you come upon this sense that, oh my goodness, what it is that I'm up to in my life, and I've never felt this way before. That I have such a yes
Mm-hmm.
within me, that this is the work that I've been called to. And it's not something you jump up and down about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, oh, I gotta tell you, I gotta tell everybody. It's just so wonderful. I'm an end of life, or
Mm-hmm.
many people use the term death,
Mm-hmm.
death, right? You don't jump up and down about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's another kind of sense of, wow, this is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm being called to, and
Yes.
what an honor and a privilege.
And as I'm listening to you, Holly, the sense I'm getting from you is it's the gift of your presence.
It is.
Yes, it
It is,
is.
and that's what one of the main roles of a doula
Mm-hmm.
is, to be a dedicated presence. That's what my instructor called it. She broke down the word doula and
Mm-hmm.
like an acronym.
Mm-hmm.
So dedicated presence, open-minded, um, I'm going to say unconditional positive regard,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of who this person is, where they've come from, what
Mm-hmm.
their beliefs are.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is treated equally,
Holly.
right? And then listening, like a deep, active kind of
Mm-hmm.
listening, like no one's ever been listened to before,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that they really feel like they've been heard.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the thing. It's like, we're not bringing in what we think is, oh, I think this is a really good time, I'm gonna teach them this, or I think they should do that, or any kind of thing like that. The judgment is like, we're taught to leave everything like outside the door.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
yeah.
yeah, Now, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm very, very excited right now because everything you're saying is resonating so deeply with me, Holly. And when I heard you describe the acronym for the word doula, the thought that popped in my head is, and I interview a lot of people that have been on, they say the near-death experiences, right? They've been on another side in the astral plane and the things they've experienced, well, what they have all come back and said and what they have in common are some of the things you're describing,
Ah,
and for that, the transition hasn't happened yet, but it's almost like you're bringing in pieces of that already and getting their innermost being into that space already. And that's awesome. That's such a gift. Such a gift.
oh, I love how you said that.
Yeah.
Because yes, it is. When we tap into an experience, then that experience
Because that's going to continue.
inform,
Yeah.
yeah, it informs how we're going to go about the rest of our life when we choose that,
Yeah.
right? So when we live as if we don't know, other than that we know we're going to die, we
Mhm,
don't know when, and
mhm,
we don't know how or where we're going to be, but there are certain things that are within our ability to choose.
mhm.
And that's what's so important where the doula comes in, because there can be a lot of misunderstanding, or just flat out right. This is what I really feel in my heart. This is the person that has the diagnosis. This
Mhm,
is the person that's been told it's whatever stage it is,
mhm,
it's whatever the name is, the
mhm,
cell type and
mhm,
and all of that, and has it spread or not spread? All the information that comes in
mhm.
is an overload,
Yes.
and
Yes.
the person's going to take it in the best way they know how,
Mhm,
and so is whoever might be there with them, because the person who is taking it in is going to take in only as much as they take in, and it's such a like, what are you talking about?
mhm.
Sometimes it's very bad news. Sometimes it's like, I don't, this is a very aggressive,
Mhm,
rapidly growing cancer, for instance. And
mhm.
then this person is sitting there and they're like, uh, now, I
Now
mean,
what?
what? I
Yeah.
mean, how much is that person going to hear?
Mhm,
And how much, even over time, how much is that person gonna like incorporate in to the way they choose to go about their life, like
mhm,
treatment decisions, things
mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
So again, back to being a doula, it's it's advocating for my client when it is that they haven't quite arrived at the point of realizing that they can advocate for themselves. And the way that that happens, I firmly believe, is that they access within themselves what we all have, but we don't access it because it's not been needed, or we just live the way that we've lived and we haven't really owned up the power that we
Mhm.
contain to the degree that we could.
And one of the things that I hear when I'm listening to you, Holly, is this whole thing can feel so spiral out of our control, right? And what I'm hearing from you is that the presence of a doula can help bring some sense of control into a situation which otherwise feels like we have no control over it. So some of the challenges that you have seen maybe with the people that you work with that comes up during this time, can you speak to that a little bit?
Some of the challenges. One client that I had a very aggressive tumor cancer that had already been spreading. She was able to control the pain in the beginning when I first started working with her, with like CBD
Mm,
creams, and
mhm,
she was using mistletoe. Actually, she was seeing a holistic practitioner, that alternative practitioner that
mhm,
qualified is what I want to say.
yeah.
Um, probably had an MD at some point in time. So mistletoe, yeah. And then nothing was working. And her mother, who is a nurse in her 80s, excuse me,
Yep.
was freaking out because she didn't know what to do with her daughter's way out, sharing about this woman who I was working with and her aggressive cancer. And she had gone from climbing, hiking, had just been with friends, and that's when she got short of breath and started wondering and being concerned because she was very capable.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to this whole downward, I mean, just a matter of months, really. And she wanted to do what she wanted to do. And her mom, like I said, was a nurse, and she had no knowledge of these other kinds of therapies. And she wasn't aligned with it, you could say.
Yeah.
But, you just, I'm a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you do. You follow these kinds of medicalized kind of
Yep.
treatments and all. But her daughter was like, no, I'm not going to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So as it happened, she had a pathological fracture. So she ended up in the hospital and then rehab. And as it turned out, her mother, there's no way she could have been a primary caregiver. Not because not for the reasons that you might think because of her age. Um, but that would be part of it. That would be part of it. But she just wouldn't, she knew she couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So here's their daughter at home, and technically, in order to be on hospice, which brings up the hospice question that we had talked about before
Yeah.
the review.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have a primary caregiver. Yeah. So her mom was the primary caregiver, but was she going to be able to be there for her daughter 24/7? No.
No.
So the way that it ended up happening, and I'll back up because before all this happened, we talked about some of her paperwork and what needed to happen, her advanced directives and, those important kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's about as far as we got. And, this is something that Doula does. I found a notary who would come into the hospital and have her, be able to complete that
Mm-hmm.
process.
Mm-hmm.
So she was complete in that. And her pain, as it turned out, when she did come home from the hospital, like I was saying, I knew there was no possible way that her mother would be able to 24/7 care for her. Well, her pain got to be so bad that because she was in hospice, under hospice care, she was able to go to the home hospice home. And there she stayed for about another, I'm going to say 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And who could have known that it would unfold in that way?
Mm-hmm.
Because she wasn't of hospice age.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, it's 65 or over, right, for Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
It's also according to your insurance coverage.
Mm-hmm.
So she had enough of the factors, and she also had the physician's order.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have an order in order to have hospice care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So during the time that she was in her more active dying time, she and her mom were able to heal friction in their relationship. That just the fact that her daughter was kind of edgy, kind of over the edge in the way that mom was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
The daughter thought that also that her parents, she didn't know how they could go on without her because they were so dependent on her. She
Mm-hmm.
was living there. So she had all these worries and concerns, and there was all this friction going on, which you can only imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was able to, not it, the relationship was actually able to come to a place of Mom was able to be there with her, and we cared for, her daughter, and I was able to be there. Started noticing the changes in her breath. She had friends there. She had music. One of her friends was a musician, and just lovely, lovely people. And
Mhm.
when she did take her last breath, we allowed her to, it's like, no, we're not going to rush her off anywhere.
Mhm.
She, however much time as we need, to all of us, to be with her, or more her friends and her family, of course. And I went and I asked for towels and washcloths, and I instructed them on how they could wash their, beloved body.
Yep.
And it was beautiful. Someone by that time was already there, and before I could use some of the essential oils that I have that are essentially, they're
Mhm.
anointing oils.
Mhm.
One of the other energy worker
Mhm.
persons had already anointed her. So it was beautiful. All the pieces came together in what I would have otherwise thought, how is this ever going to work out? And it did.
And it.
And she chose a method of with her body. We talk
Mhm.
about body disposal.
Mhm.
What would she want to do? And she knew she didn't want to be embalmed.
Mhm.
She was thinking cremation. And I had come to find out about, well, there's a kind of cremation that is not damaging to the environment. It's called aquamation. Yeah, so it's with water and steam and a much lower temperature than traditional cremation. And it's alkaline hydrolysis is the
Mm.
process. It's not like similar to an incinerator. It doesn't release toxic fumes like traditional cremation does.
Mhm. Mhm.
And but that's good. It's far enough. I mean, Enswell in Hillsborough, North Carolina, is how I found out all about this.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what she ended up choosing.
Yeah.
So we had this time with her, that I said
Mhm.
all that so that you'd understand that she didn't get whisked away.
Yeah.
I think some people and family members think, oh, we've got to say our goodbyes, because they're going to come and take our beloved away.
Mhm.
You can ask for time,
Mhm.
ask for as much time. You can say, you know, give us an hour. Or in this case, the transport was coming from a distance, so it was even longer than that.
Mhm.
So her friends and her family stayed with her right up until the time that, the transport folks arrived. And it was really beautiful. We had a memorial service for her at this aquamation, um,
Yep. Yep.
for lack of a better word, facility in this
Mhm.
business. It's the most wonderful people. They call it a modern funeral home.
It is good to know. I would have never known that, Holly. There are so many pieces to this process, right? And having someone that's not, a part of the family, because then that, when you're too close to a situation, gets harder too. But to have a fresh pair of eyes, right? A fresh pair of hands and a heart like yours to come in and help. And I was listening to you describing the challenge, but then the beautiful way in which all of you were able to support her in her final moments, right? And that's what I was talking about earlier, bringing a piece of that, the peace, the joy, the kindness, the compassion into a very, very difficult situation. So, how do you cope with all that grief? Or, it's hard for you, even as an observer and being an empath, which I could tell you're one, not to absorb all that and still stay strong and help the family.
Yes, and I'm often, very often asked that question. It's very important. The self-care aspect is very important. And every doula, every person who's working in end of life care, any person who is living with stress, I would love to know, has developed some way of having a self-care practice.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I love music. I have certain kinds of music that I love to listen to. I love being outside. I love the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
That it shifts the frequency. You know,
Mm.
if you think about our thoughts, they actually have a frequency to them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how come we can go spiraling downward. You know, if you think of us as, like a DNA spiral, we can spiral up in our awareness, or we can spiral down, because our thoughts are what take us there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when we shift our frequency, do something different, that
Mm-hmm.
makes all the difference in the world. Get on the phone with a friend and just not even necessarily talk it all out like in detail.
Mm-hmm.
Someone that you know is going to nurture your soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I encourage people to create a circle of support, and not everybody has that circle.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's so important. And I know you said we were coming to the end, and there is
Yes.
something that I wanted to share.
Yes, please go ahead.
I think it goes along with what we're talking about. It's a woman who I'm going to call her a colleague. We both went to the University of Vermont Larner School of Medicine for our doula training. It was virtual. So it's Diane Button is her name, and the title is Dear Death: Finding Meaning in Life, Peace in Death, and Joy in an Ordinary Day. Isn't that lovely?
Yes.
Love that. And then here it is. I'm going to give all the credit here to Donna. Um, excuse me, Diane Button, Diane. To die with love, live in love.
Mm-hmm.
To die with peace, live in peace.
Mm-hmm.
So like right now, like start right now, and whatever may be standing in the way of that happening,
Mm-hmm.
look at it. Be willing to be brave and courageous, right? So you can live in peace and live in love. To die with acceptance, live with acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
To die in harmony with all beings, live in harmony with all beings. To die with a kind heart, live with a kind heart. To die with gratitude, live in gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
To die with meaning, live with meaning. To die free of regrets, live free of regrets.
Mm-hmm.
To die spiritually connected, live spiritually connected.
Mm-hmm.
And to die with a full loving heart, live with a full loving heart.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's beautiful, Holly. Because, as we talked about the very first thing when we started this show, that the end of life starts when we're born.
It does.
It does. So this whole thing is a process, not just when we end up with a diagnosis or something like that, but yeah. And so this is a very beautiful thought. How we live is how we die, I guess. That's
Oh,
pretty
that's
much, yeah,
eventually that
that's what,
sums it all up.
yeah,
That sums it all up.
yeah.
And if I could say one more thing,
Yes, please.
what I'm offering, and this is something that my instructor wrote, a guide for death doulas for everybody, essentially,
Mhm.
really, to living fully and dying prepared.
Mhm.
So I went through a little training to become a coordinator, to be able to form these groups of to create a 6-week community
Mhm.
series
Mhm.
called Living Fully and Dying Prepared. Yeah, so
And
that's a great way to kickstart the process,
yes, do
Not
you,
everybody is going to be living where it is that there's a doula that's offering something like this.
oh, that's
You can get this book.
the Dead Doula's Guide. Yeah. I
Yeah,
need to
and the
put the,
author, Yeah, the author is Francesca Arnaldi, and she gets a lot of kudos from me. Because every time I refer to the book, of course, I refer to her name. But yeah, we come together, we read portions of the book, live in person, and when we come together, we discuss what it is that came up for us and what we're challenged with. And we become a nurturing, supporting community to each other, which is
That's
so important.
especially, yes, very much so. And Holly, how can folks reach out to you or find you, or even more information about the community, more information about your services? Would that the best way to reach you? Would that be your website? Would that be your email? Let me know, and I'll make sure I include those in the show notes.
Okay, well, I can say them now, or you
Yes,
in
and
case
I'll also
people.
include it. Yep.
Okay, so my website is Holly, Holly, and then EOL for end of life, Doula, DOULA.com.
Perfect.
And
And
my email is super easy. One Doula Holly, Gmail. Yeah.
yep.
And 919 is my phone number, 919-606-3332.
That is perfect. I'll make sure to include all of this in the show notes.
We
Appreciate
speak
this,
in,
Holly.
we speak in our community, whatever that
Yes.
might be.
Yep.
I've been a panelist at the library
That's
here
awesome.
locally.
Do you put all this in your website, like whenever you're doing a speaking engagement or something? If someone was interested to know what event you're speaking at, what would be the best way for them to find out? Like just go to your website?
Yes, and also my Facebook
Oh,
page, the group. It's
the
called
group.
Brave Living with the End in View.
Mm. And it's a private group. Okay. I will
Right.
make sure to.
Visible, but private. Yeah.
But private. I'll make sure to include that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for your time today, Holly, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're